What the hell is going on with Canada? Welcome to the Ordinary Canadian episode 10. The spring economic update came out last week, and Minister Champagne was in Toronto talking it up at the Empire Club, which totally does not scream globalism. And the headline number, the one the government is proudest of, is that the deficit for 2025-26 came in at $67 billion. It's lower than the $78 billion that was projected in last year's budget. Better than expected, right? Even though we bought all these new arms systems. That's true, but it's not the whole story. Let's start with what's actually in the update. The Canadian economy grew 1.7% in 2025, second fastest in the G7, which sounds really good until you remember that 1.7% is by historical standards pretty low compared to, 2.5. Growth is actually projected to drop to 1.1% in 2026, and that's optimistic given what's going on in the Gulf. The deficit this year is basically projected to be $53 billion, meaning Canada is going to run significant deficits for the entire forecasted horizon every single year through the end of the decade. This accumulated deficit is going to add about $309 billion to the national debt by 2030. The government calls this, quote, maintaining fiscal strength, unquote. RBC Economics called it, quote, growth-focused, deficit-fueled, same federal strategy, unquote. All right. Here's the number that Finance Minister Champagne didn't highlight at the Empire Club. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, the independent watchdog whose entire job it is to tell you what the government's numbers actually mean, released its own assessment alongside the spring update. The PBO found that the full cost of Canada's NATO commitment to reach 5% of GDP in defense spending, a commitment Carney made, is not actually reflected in the government's fiscal projections. We are continuing to see this trend of opacity by the Carney government. The PBO establishes that commitment is going to add $63 billion in additional deficit impact by 2035-2036. $63 billion. Not in the numbers, not in the forecast. Described by the PBO as a, quote, material upside risk to the deficit and debt projections. And to translate that into human speak, the government is showing you a deficit track that goes from $67 billion this year to $53 billion in 2030, but it's not including the full cost of our defense commitments in those numbers. If you add that back in, the fiscal picture looks far worse than advertised. The government's two fiscal anchors, the rules it set for itself, are keep the deficit to GDP ratio declining and balance the operating budget by 2028-29. The PBO finds it technically meets these anchors, but the buffer against the operating balance is now only $900 million in the relevant year. $900 million of margin running a country is not fiscal strength. It's a rounding error away from missing the target. So the government is also announcing the Canada Strong Fund, a new $25 billion sovereign wealth fund to invest in strategic Canadian projects, which sounds great, and we've done a video about it, but we're borrowing to do that too. So our fiscal position right now is genuinely better than many of our, comparables, but it ain't great.